What's up, YouTube? My name's Danny, this is Homestead DNA, and I'm coming to you with a video about pesticides. Specifically, 3 or 4 different types of pesticides that we use or have used, and I wanted to talk about them just in general. So when we're talking about pesticides, it's pretty important to know what is a pesticide. Well, a pesticide includes herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, miticides as well. So really anything that gets rid of or kills a pest. So weeds are considered pests. Insects obviously are pests. So when you're talking about pesticides, you have to be clear in what you're referring to. And there's also pesticides means kills. Deterrents are not pesticides. They do exist. I'll give you an example. So if you use peppermint scent around your garden, it's not going to kill the animals or the insects, but it will chase them off, they just don't like it, so they won't stick around. So again, we're talking about literally chemicals that will kill insects. Now, there are also a billion different chemicals that will kill insects, but I'm going to talk about the kind of top 3 that we use in our garden, most of which would be considered organic relatively. So first things first, let's talk about pyrethrin. Now, we don't use pyrethrin too much, but we do have it and can use it if we need to. So pyrethrin is actually an extract from the chrysanthemum flower. Now usually it's artificially made, but that's where it's actually sourced from. Sometimes I say usually it's artificially made. Actually, a lot of times it's not, but it can be artificially made. But it is a completely natural product from a chrysanthemum flower, and it's just a concentrate of a chemical that comes from that flower. So what pyrethrin controls, or some of the things it controls, are aphids, webworms, leafhoppers, cucumber beetles, cabbage loopers, Colorado potato beetles, and white flies are just some of the things that it can control. So how it works is it actually excites the nervous system of the insect. So it actually makes them just start uncontrollably moving, and that eventually kills the insect. So that's how a lot of these work. Is there's modes of action in which the insect is affected in certain ways. Some things will suffocate an insect. Some things will chemically react to its nervous system and make it go into basically a seizure until it dies. Now, pyrethrin's been around for a really long time, and it's been around. There are records of it being used, that the Chinese used it in 1000 BC. They were using crushed chrysanthemum as a pest control. So this is not a new insecticide. It's been around for a really long time. Generally speaking, it is organic. However, you have to be careful with what the label is, because they do have an additive in most mixes that you get of pyrethrin that it will make it non-organic, which is piperenyl butoxide, which is an active ingredient that actually helps it kill off insects and reduces the buildup of a tolerance to pyrethrin. By itself, insects can pretty easily build a tolerance, so this is actually just an additive to help make sure that we don't have a buildup. Now, a lot of the new insecticides today, or the ones that you hear about more commonly, are great because they actually break down in the environment relatively quickly. Some of the old things that we used to use a long time ago, the biggest problem was that they stayed around forever. They would soak into the soil, and then they would run into the groundwater, and they would remain active and kill everything in its path. The ones that have been developed today, and found out about, a lot of the ones that are today actually break down very quickly usually within about 24 to 48 hours, the sun will break them down. So the environment will actually break apart the chemical and make it inert. So it's not effective after a few, a day or two. That way it also doesn't remain constant in the environment and is made essentially safe for anything. Now, the problem with that is you probably need to apply it more often because of that. So if you apply this and it's 1 to 2 days, it's no longer effective after that. Now, they recommend you don't just spray this all the time, because if you do, insects will build a tolerance to it. So you want to probably switch these things up, and this is really with all insecticides, not just this in particular, but you want to switch this up. Maybe 1 week use one week use another one. At least do that. At least, kind of go back and forth. But you definitely don't want to use this all the time. You don't want to use it every 2 days. But you use it once a week or so is fine. The only thing about pyrethrin that is probably pretty bad is it is harmful to aquatic things like fish, amphibians, frogs, that sort of stuff. And bees, it will kill bees. So you do want to avoid spraying it while the flowers are open and the pollinators are out. So do this in the evening once the pollinators are all gone, the flowers have closed up, and then let it sit overnight, and it will start to degrade over time, and it won't affect the bees in that way. The other thing about this is it comes in several different forms. It comes in like liquid and dust form. With all of these, the dust form is worse if you're worried about bees and things like that, because the liquid form is the one that breaks down more than the dust will over time. The bees can get the dust attached to them, and then it's bad. When the liquid's dry, it's not as bad for the bees because they tend not to actually pick it up because it's dried onto the leaf. So they're not actually picking it up and taking it with them and killing them later. So that's pyrethrin. Pyrethrin is very common, and we will use it from time to time if we need to. And we don't particularly use insecticides all the time anyway. We will only use it if we see a specific problem and it's become a big problem, or about to become a big problem. We will use it and then try to stop it. So this next one is my favorite, honestly, of all of them, is Spinosad. So Spinosad is actually relatively new. It has not been around for a long time, but it's a very effective treatment for insects. Spinosad, it uses chemicals that are natural soil bacteria, similar to BT, which we'll talk about next, but it's a soil bacteria that is used that kills insects. Now, it's really, it needs to be consumed mostly. It can be sprayed on contact, but it will control things like spider mites, cucumber beetles, corn borers, thrips, flea beetles, leaf miners, mosquitoes even. They use Spinosad in sprays and stuff for mosquitoes. Also, it's used in head lice shampoos. So if you're worried about, whether you can use it on yourself, that's one of the chemicals in some of the head lice shampoos. So it is relatively safe for humans to use and even be around. It does affect the nervous system of the insects as well, so it makes them basically go into a seizure mode until they die. So did our Spinosad work? To ask this guy. He does not look very happy though. That guy too. I think that I'm going to say that Spinosad did a good job. So, chalk one up for the Spinosad. They do need to eat it. And so what happens is you spray it on the leaves, especially leaf miners and things that eat the leaves. Colorado potato beetles, for instance, will eat that leaf, and then they will just kind of seize up, start twitching, and then they'll just die. It takes about 1 to 2 days for everything to die off, but somewhere in that range, they're pretty much going to die, and it is really effective. they become basically paralyzed in 1 to 2 days. So it does break down in UV light. It takes 2 to 16 days for it to break down in UV light, but it will break down eventually. Now, it has less than 1 day to break down in water, which is interesting. So once you mix it, you do want to make sure that you use it. It'll become less effective the more that you let it sit. It also has a very low potential to move through the soil, which is a very good thing. So it binds to sediment. So, and now when it binds to sediment, it stays active a little bit longer, but it's less likely to actually drain off into, streams and things like that. So it'll actually bind to the sediment and stay there instead of, um, going down and getting into streams more likely. It is toxic to bees when it's wet. After it dries, it's not. There's really no noticeable effect to bees. But when it is wet, if you sprayed a flower and a bee came along and jumped on it when it was wet, it would actually be toxic to the bees. We can talk about toxicity. It's probably not as toxic as pyrethrin, but it is still toxic. So, I don't know what I did with my BT sheet, but BT stands for Bacillus thuringiensis, I think is thuringiensis. I'm going based off of memory. Sorry, I apparently lost my sheet on it. But BT is also a bacteria that's in soil. It's been used in organic gardening for a long time. It's it is an approved organic use pesticide, and it can control worms. It's really specifically used on worms, leaf miners, kind of moth worms that are going to eat the leaves. You can put it on the silk of corn, so that the corn earworm will actually be killed. Now, how BT works is it actually is ingested into the stomach, and it actually dissolves the stomach lining of the insect. So now, an insect's stomach lining is very sensitive and small, but when that happens, the insect just stops eating, and basically that's how it dies. It eventually just starves to death because it stops eating. It basically gives it an upset stomach, and and tears up the lining, and it doesn't eat anymore, and then it's done. BT is also still toxic to bees in the same way, so you do want to keep your sprays. Try to spray not during the middle of the day if you can help it. Try to spray towards the evening just to help protect your local bee population. But again, it's an organic pesticide essentially. It's natural, found in the soil bacteria. So those are the top 3 chemicals that we use here on the homestead to actually control insects. There are other things that you can use as well that are a little different. Now, one of the great things about these 3 in particular is that you can spray it on the plant, and if an insect comes along and then eats the plant, the insect is affected by the pesticide. On a lot of things you can use that are different than these pesticides, like neem oil, for instance. So neem oil will kill an insect as well. It is a pesticide. It is also organic, but it is a pesticide that uses a little bit of a different method. Basically, you have to spray the insect directly. It's really not very effective unless you hit them directly. So a lot of insects, it's very difficult. They're on the underside of leaves. You don't hit them, you spray the top of the leaves, they just hide underneath and they're fine until it dries. So it's less effective overall. You've got to really hit them with it. It can work if you really soak it enough and they just happen to walk in it, but basically what it'll do in a lot of instances is actually close their mouth. It clogs up their breathing, their ability to eat, and a lot of these oils work in the same way. As they start to, they kind of clog up the insect because it's so small. It's got a little tiny mouth. So there's neem oil, sesame oil, peppermint oil works the same way. Also though, the peppermint oil it has a scent that's a deterrent to a lot of insects. Same with garlic spray and things like that. Dish soap and water totally works. If you can spray something directly, especially a small insect, dish soap and water is going to kill it because the tiny bubbles get caught. I mean, it really does kill it pretty well. I will say one thing. I do find it interesting sometimes people talk about not wanting to spray chemicals on their garden, but they'll spray dish soap on their garden. Okay, fine. It's up to you. But so those are really good options, though, to kill insects. Now, other things that you can, so those are insecticides usually. There are some deterrents that are kind of in there as well, but there are also very specific deterrents. Things like marigolds, planting marigolds, the smell of marigolds deters a lot of things. It actually deters some rabbits and deer sometimes as well. I don't know how much they really care, but depends on how hungry they are. But a lot of different herbs, dill, things like that. Insects don't like the smell of those things, and they will stay away. So it helps. The last thing I'm going to talk about, which really isn't necessarily something you can control, although you can add these, but they're beneficial insects. So beneficial insects like ladybugs is a kind of a common one that people understand. Dragonflies, we have a ton of dragonflies over here. So dragonflies control flies, cucumber beetles, small things like that they can actually grab and eat. They'll eat anything. Now they will probably also eat ladybugs if they're big enough. But it's always about a balance, trying to equalize itself. Lacewings, which are these little insects with the kind of clear wings, they eat tons of aphids and stuff like that. So lacewings are good. Ladybugs are good. There's actually a beetle that looks just like a ladybug, except for it's a little bit oranger and it's much more invasive, called an Asian lady beetle. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, I think it's an Asian lady beetle. Now, they were brought over here to actually control insects like aphids and things like that. And the problem is they're an invasive species. However, they are invasive, and they will multiply by the millions. And you'll hate them because they'll go in your house and everything. But they eat the exact same as a ladybug. So they eat aphids, they eat all those things. So while they are kind of annoying in your house, and they, again, just spread like wildfire, they're good at controlling pests. So they're still beneficial. They will actually bite you too if you mess with them. It doesn't really hurt that bad, but they will bite you. They're much more aggressive than regular ladybugs. And then last but not least are beneficial wasps that actually can come in and lay eggs in. I use this for the biggest example, the best example is tomato hornworms. So there are these beneficial wasps that come in and they actually lay eggs inside the hornworm, paralyze the hornworm, and then the eggs come out and basically eat the hornworm. Crazy stuff. They're super tiny wasps. I'm not talking about like, bee wasps. I'm talking about itty bitty things that are still in the wasp category. So, but all those things are very beneficial to controlling insects in your garden. There's a million more things, but I just wanted to talk about insecticides, beneficial organisms, and really just kind of give you guys some information that I've learned about these things. So, again, my name is Danny. This is Homestead DNA. If you like this kind of stuff, be sure to hit like and subscribe. Share this video if you think it'd be beneficial to somebody else. And we'll see you guys on the other side. I appreciate you stopping by. Bye.